Hi, I'm Lena. I'm 31, and I live in Copenhagen, working now as a freelance creative consultant. My life feels aligned these days, peaceful, even. But there was a time, not that long ago, when everything I thought I knew about loyalty, about hard work paying off, about belonging, completely shattered. It all started with a meeting invite, just a standard calendar notification popping up on my screen. The subject line was something innocuous like, Team Sync, but the little detail that stuck out, the one that felt like a warm, sugary promise in the middle of a busy week, was the cake emoji beside the title. Who doesn't love cake at work? It signals celebration, a birthday, a milestone reached, a moment to pause and share something sweet with your colleagues. I'd worked at that company for years, poured my heart and soul into it, risen through the ranks to become a creative lead. I genuinely believed I was part of something, a valued member of a team that felt, at times, like a second family. That cake emoji felt like a little wink from the universe, or at least from HR, promising a moment of lightness. What it actually promised was the exact opposite. It was bait, a cruel, almost absurdly cheerful trap. That meeting wasn't a celebration. It was an execution. I was about to be fired. The betrayal I felt in that room wasn't just about losing my job. It went deeper. It felt like a personal violation, like being discarded by people I trusted, by a system I'd bought into completely. It stripped away my professional identity, yes, but it also unearthed older, more familiar feelings of not being enough, of being fundamentally disposable, feelings I'd spent years trying to bury. But that wasn't the end of my story. It was the brutal, necessary beginning. That betrayal, that carefully disguised blow, eventually led me to do something I never thought I had the courage for. I bought the expired domain name of my former company and started writing. I started telling the truth. And that blog, it went viral. It became far more than just a place to air grievances. It became a platform for something real, something raw, something that resonated with thousands of people who had also felt invisible, exploited, and betrayed by places they had given so much to. It was terrifying, cathartic, and ultimately, the most empowering thing I've ever done. Maybe you've felt this way too. Maybe you've poured yourself into a job, a relationship, a family, only to have your loyalty and hard work met with indifference or worse. Maybe you've felt the sting of being easily replaced after giving your all. Let me know where you're watching from, and if any of this sounds familiar. Because sometimes, knowing you're not alone, is the first step towards reclaiming your power. The email arrived late on a Tuesday afternoon. The kind of Tuesday that had felt relentless from the moment my alarm shrieked, a blur of deadlines, client calls, and trying to wrangle creative energy from a team that was running on fumes. The subject line, Quick sync, Lena. And yes, the small innocent cake emoji sat there, a cruel little digital cherry on top. My immediate thought wasn't dread, but mild surprise. A sync? With cake? Was it someone's birthday I'd forgotten? Was it just a random treat? We weren't exactly the kind of office that had spontaneous cake just because. I remember the walk down the corridor towards the conference room. My heels clicked on the polished concrete floor, a sound that suddenly felt very loud in the quiet hum of the office. I mentally scanned my calendar. No significant milestones were being celebrated on my team. No client wins big enough for confectionery. The knot of confusion tightened slightly, but still, the cake emoji promised sweetness. It was a little anchor of normalcy in the back of my mind. The room was one of the smaller, windowless ones, used usually for sensitive conversations or impromptu huddles away from the main office buzz. My boss, a man named Søren whose default expression hovered somewhere between vaguely stressed and mildly bored, was already there, seated at the head of the table. Beside him was Maria from HR, her expression neutral, almost artificially calm. There was no cake, not even a crumb. My stomach dropped. The absence of the promised treat was a physical punch, a tiny, absurd detail that screamed that whatever this was, it wasn't good. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with unspoken words. I sat down, pulling my chair in, trying to project calm I didn't feel. Surin didn't waste time on small talk. He cleared his throat, a dry, dusty sound. Lena, thanks for coming. We've asked you here today to discuss your position at the company. My heart started to pound against my ribs like a trapped bird. Position? I was a creative lead. I had projects running, a team relying on me, plans for the next quarter. What about my position? Maria spoke next, her voice smooth and devoid of inflection, the kind of voice designed to deliver bad news professionally. As you know, the company is undergoing some restructuring. We've had to make some difficult decisions about resource allocation and strategic direction. Restructuring. The corporate buzzword that always meant cuts. Still, my mind scrambled. Resource allocation? Strategic direction? I was a successful lead. My projects consistently met or exceeded expectations. My team was high performing. Where did I fit into being cut? Unfortunately, Maria continued, and the word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. This means we've had to eliminate your role, effective immediately. Eliminate my role, not fire me for performance. Eliminate my role, as if the years I'd spent building that role, investing in it, pouring my expertise and energy into it, meant nothing. As if creative lead simply vanished into thin air because a spreadsheet somewhere dictated it. My breath hitched, my vision blurred for a second. Eliminate? My role? I managed, the words feeling foreign and flimsy on my tongue. Surin leaned forward slightly, his gaze meeting mine, but it held no empathy, only a practiced weariness. It's a difficult decision, Lena, driven by market changes. It's not a reflection of your work, of course. Not a reflection of your work, the boilerplate phrase, the hollow reassurance meant to cushion the blow, but which only made it sharper. If it wasn't a reflection of my work, what was it? Arbitrary? Unfair? Politically motivated? It felt like a dismissal not just of my role, but of me. Of my value, my dedication, my years of loyalty. Maria slid a document across the table, a termination letter. My name was at the top, followed by legal jargon I couldn't process. The world outside the windowless room suddenly felt very far away. The cake emoji. The promise of something sweet. It felt like they had used it to mock me, to lure me into this sterile room for this calculated amputation. We've prepared a severance package, Maria said, her finger tapping the relevant paragraph on the letter. Details are outlined here. We've also arranged for outplacement services if you'd like support with your job search. Severance. Outplacement. These words floated around me, meaningless sounds in the sudden silence of my shock. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck, a combination of humiliation and disbelief. My hands trembled slightly on the cool surface of the table. Effective immediately? I asked again, needing to hear it, to make it real. Yes, Surin confirmed, his voice still flat. We'll need your company laptop and phone by the end of the day. Maria will walk you through the logistics. The logistics. Handing over the tools of a trade that, moments ago, had been my identity. Clearing my desk. Walking out the door, not at the end of a productive day, but as a cast-off. The finality of it washed over me, cold and suffocating. I don't remember much of what Maria said next about the paperwork. My mind was a chaotic storm of images and feelings. The late nights I'd worked, the weekends I'd sacrificed, the times I'd gone above and beyond because I believed in the company, in my team. I saw the faces of colleagues I'd mentored, the projects I'd nursed from fragile ideas to successful launches, the creative energy I'd poured into every task. All of it reduced to resource allocation and strategic direction. It wasn't just professional disappointment, it was a profound sense of personal betrayal. I had trusted this environment. I had made it a central part of my life, blurring the lines between work and personal identity in the way many dedicated professionals do. I had believed that if I worked hard, if I was good at my job, if I was loyal, I would be safe, I would be valued. The cake emoji meeting proved how naive that belief had been. It proved that I was just a cog, easily removed when the machine needed to reconfigure. When the meeting ended, Maria escorted me back to my desk. The walk felt like the longest walk of my life. Every face I passed seemed to look away, or maybe I just imagined it. The usual office sounds, typing, hushed conversations, the distant whir of the coffee machine, seemed amplified, mocking my sudden silence. Gathering my personal effects felt surreal. A framed photo, a favorite mug, a plant I'd nursed back to health, small tokens of a life that had just been irrevocably altered. I packed mechanically, my movements stiff and unnatural. Colleagues approached, offering hesitant words of sympathy, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fear. Fear, I realized, that it could happen to them too. The camaraderie, the sense of being in it together, felt fragile, performative in the face of the corporate machine's indifference. Leaving the building was the hardest part. Stepping out into the bright Copenhagen afternoon felt jarringly normal, while my internal world was in ruins. The city was buzzing, bikes whizzing past, people laughing in cafes, the distant sound of a bus. Life was carrying on, completely oblivious to the fact that my carefully constructed reality had just imploded. I walked home in a daze, the heavy box of my belongings under my arm. The familiar streets, usually a source of comfort, felt alien. Each step was a struggle against the inertia of shock. When I finally reached my apartment, I dropped the box just inside the door and collapsed onto the sofa. The tears came then, hot and fast, a release of the pressure that had been building since I saw that chillingly cheerful cake emoji. I cried for the job, yes, for the lost income and the uncertainty of the future, but mostly, I cried for the betrayal, for the feeling of being disposable, for the years I had given, the energy I had expended, the loyalty I had felt, all of it seemingly counting for nothing. It felt deeply personal, like a rejection at a fundamental level. The weeks that followed were a blur of grief, anger, and paralyzing self-doubt. I went through the motions of updating my CV, browsing job boards, the standard steps you take when you're suddenly unemployed, but my heart wasn't in it. How could I sell myself, project confidence, when I felt utterly broken? The termination wasn't just a professional setback, it had become an indictment of my worth. If I was so easily discarded after years of dedicated work, what did that say about me? I replayed the meeting over and over in my head. The sterile room, So Ren's vacant eyes, Maria's placid voice. The cake emoji. Always the cake emoji, a symbol of the insidious way they had sugarcoated a bitter pill. It wasn't just a detail, it felt deliberate, a final, dismissive flourish that trivialized the impact of their decision on a human being. The anger simmered beneath the surface of my despair. Anger at Surin, at Maria, at the faceless executives who made the decision, at the company itself. But the most potent anger was directed at myself. Anger for being so naive, so invested, so willing to believe in the illusion of a benevolent workplace. Anger for the countless times I had bitten my tongue, pushed down my own needs, worked unpaid hours, and accepted passive-aggressive comments or dismissive feedback because I valued the team harmony and wanted to be seen as committed. I started to see the patterns more clearly now, stripped of the filter of my own people-pleasing and desire to belong. The subtle ways contributions were ignored or minimized. The expectation that female employees, in particular, would handle the office emotional labor, planning birthdays, oh, the irony, mediating small conflicts, being the approachable face while male colleagues were solely focused on strategic work. My own role as a creative lead had demanded immense emotional intelligence and nurturing of talent, labor that was crucial but often went unseen and undervalued compared to hard metrics. I realized I had been operating in a toxic system, one that thrived on extracting maximum output while giving minimum emotional return or security. I had been so busy trying to prove my worth within that system that I hadn't stopped to question the system itself. I had accepted the narrative they presented, that hard work and loyalty were rewarded, when the reality was that you were valuable only as long as you fit neatly into their ever-changing strategic direction. My identity had become so intertwined with my job, with my role as creative lead at company name, that losing it felt like losing a part of myself. The silence in my apartment during the day was deafening. My creative spark, usually a constant fire, felt extinguished. I felt lost at sea, adrift without the structure and validation that work had provided. Friends tried to help, offering words of encouragement, sending job postings, but their efforts often felt like they bounced off a shield of numb despair I had erected around myself. How could I explain the depth of the wound? It wasn't just about a paycheck, it was about the fundamental injustice, the feeling that I had been fundamentally misunderstood and discarded by people I had trusted implicitly. The betrayal felt as sharp and personal as if it had come from family, because I had given it that level of trust, that depth of investment. I spent too many days on the sofa, staring blankly at the ceiling, scrolling through social media, comparing myself to others, feeling utterly worthless. The severance package provided some financial buffer, but the anxiety about the future was a constant companion. Copenhagen is an expensive city, and the pressure to find new work quickly was immense. One evening, weeks into my unemployment purgatory, I was aimlessly browsing online, a common activity when you're trying to avoid facing reality. I ended up on my old company's website. I don't know why, maybe a morbid curiosity, maybe a lingering sense of attachment or disbelief. I clicked around, seeing the projects I'd initiated, the team I'd led. It felt like looking at a life I had lived in a different century. Then I had a thought, a sudden, sharp jolt of defiance that cut through the fog of my despair. I wondered if they still owned the domain name related to the company name, but with a slight variation, something that could be used for commentary. Out of pure, idle curiosity, I typed in a domain name I'd just thought of, a slightly critical twist on their brand. To my surprise, it was available. And then, another thought, bolder, more rebellious, flickered into existence. What about their actual domain name, but with a different extension, or perhaps an older version? I had no real expectation. Companies usually keep their core domains locked down tight. But on a whim, driven by that tiny spark of defiance, I typed in their company name followed by .blog. To my astonishment, a message popped up. Domain available. My heart leaped into my throat. Available? How could it be available? A company of that size, that profile. Surely they wouldn't let their main domain, even with a different extension, expire? It felt impossible. I double-checked the spelling, the extension. Yes, it was their company name. And it was available. A different kind of feeling began to bubble up inside me. Not sadness, not fear, but a potent mix of disbelief and opportunity. It felt like a cosmic joke, a loophole left wide open by the very entity that had discarded me. They had taken my job, my sense of security, my professional identity, and in their carelessness, they had left the door open for me to reclaim something, to reclaim my voice. In that moment, staring at the domain available message on my screen, the idea solidified. Not just an idea, but a burning need. I wouldn't just look for another job. I wouldn't just move on quietly. They had silenced me, dismissed my worth, and used a fake cake invite to do it. Now, I had a chance to speak, loudly, and from a platform directly linked to their own identity. It was audacious. It was risky. It felt incredibly daunting. But it also felt right, in a way nothing else had felt since that Tuesday afternoon. The anger that had been simmering finally found a direction, a purpose. I wouldn't be the quiet victim who faded away. I would use the platform they had inadvertently handed me. Without giving myself time to overthink, to let the fear creep back in, I went through the process of buying the domain name. Clicking the confirmation button felt like a small act of rebellion, a tiny victory in the face of profound defeat. The domain was mine. The virtual ground was now my own. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind was racing. not with despair, but with words, ideas, structure. What would I write? How would I tell my story? How could I expose the toxic culture without sounding bitter or simply complaining? The goal wasn't just catharsis, it was about shedding light on systemic issues, on the human cost of corporate indifference, on the insidious nature of environments that demand everything while giving little security or genuine value in return. I decided I would call the blog simply companyname.blog. No fancy title, no clever wordplay. Just the name, stark and direct. It was an assertion of provenance, a clear statement that this commentary was directly related to that place. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into writing. It wasn't easy. It required reliving painful moments, dissecting conversations, analyzing interactions that had left me feeling small or undervalued. I wrote about the long hours that were expected, not requested. I wrote about the projects I'd poured my heart into that were then presented by others with minimal credit to my team or myself. I wrote about the subtle dynamics, the passive aggression, the way feedback was delivered not to help you grow, but to keep you off balance. I wrote about the emotional labor, the unseen work that kept the office functioning smoothly but was never listed in a job description or rewarded financially. The times I'd listened to a struggling colleague for an hour, costing me billable time. The thoughtful gifts I'd organized, the carefully worded emails I'd drafted to smooth ruffled feathers between departments. It was labor, crucial labor. But because it wasn't strategic or hard business metrics, it was invisible. It was the kind of labor that disproportionately falls on women in many workplaces, and I had excelled at it, believing it made me a valuable team player, only to find it didn't matter when it came down to the bottom line. I wrote about the feeling of being disposable, of giving years of my life to a place that could sever ties with a single, sterile meeting and a fake cake emoji. I didn't name specific individuals, focusing instead on patterns of behavior, on the culture itself. I wanted it to be relatable, to resonate with anyone who had experienced similar dynamics in their own workplace. The writing process was incredibly intense. There were days I would write for hours, fueled by a potent mix of anger and determination, the words flowing out of me, raw and unfiltered. There were other days when I would stare at a blank screen, paralyzed by fear. What if no one read it? What if the company found out and retaliated? What if I was just seen as a bitter, disgruntled ex-employee? My internal monologue was a constant battle between the voice of fear and the voice of defiance. Fear whispered, "Stay quiet, don't rock the boat. Just try to get another job and pretend this never happened." Defiance roared back, "They silenced you, they hurt you, your story matters, others are going through this too. Speak your truth." Slowly, painstakingly, the blog took shape. I designed a simple website, clean and easy to navigate. I proofread my posts countless times, refining the language, ensuring the focus remained on systemic issues rather than personal attacks. I wanted it to be credible, thoughtful, and impactful. The decision to publish felt monumental. I sat at my laptop, my finger hovering over the publish button, my heart hammering in my chest. It was late at night. The city outside was quiet. This felt like jumping off a cliff, irrevocably changing the trajectory of my life. Would I crash and burn? Or would I finally learn to fly? I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a second, and clicked. The blog was live. The immediate aftermath was terrifying silence. For the first few hours, nothing happened. My blog analytics showed 0 views. Had I done all this for nothing? Was my story just a whisper in the vast, noisy digital world? The fear started to creep back in, heavier than before. I woke up the next morning feeling anxious and drained. I made coffee, avoiding looking at my laptop. Finally, summoning a reluctant courage, I opened the analytics page. My eyes widened. The number wasn't 0 anymore. It was growing rapidly. I checked my email and social media. A few friends had shared the link, then a few more. A former colleague, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, sent a private message. Lena, I read your blog. Thank you. You are so brave. So much of this resonates. And then it exploded. Someone with a large following on social media shared the link, adding their own comment about toxic work cultures. The link was retweeted, shared on LinkedIn, posted on Facebook groups. The traffic to the blog surged. Comments started pouring in. Not just a trickle, but a flood. People were reading. People were reacting. The comments were overwhelming, in the best possible way. People shared their own stories, their own experiences of toxic bosses, unreasonable demands, feeling invisible, being unexpectedly laid off. The phrase, "This is exactly what happened to me," appeared again and again. My specific story, rooted in my experience at that particular company, had somehow tapped into a universal vein of frustration and pain shared by countless others. My blog wasn't just my story anymore, it was becoming a collective voice. Media outlets started to notice. A local newspaper contacted me for an interview. Then a national one. Then radio. I was suddenly, unexpectedly, public. Sharing my story in this amplified way was daunting, but the sheer volume of supportive messages, the validation from strangers who saw their own experiences reflected in mine, gave me strength. The company, my former employer, remained publicly silent. They didn't issue a statement. They didn't contact me directly to threaten legal action, perhaps realizing that drawing more attention would only amplify the story further. Their silence, in its own way, was an acknowledgement. My words had landed. They couldn't ignore the public conversation I had started, even if they pretended to. Behind the scenes, I heard through the grapevine that there was turmoil within the company. Discussions were happening. Some employees were apparently challenging the culture, citing my blog. Whether this led to significant internal change, I don't know for sure, but I knew I had, at the very least, disrupted their comfortable narrative. I had forced them to confront, privately if not publicly, the impact of their actions. The viral success of the blog was surreal. I, the woman who had been quietly dismissed with a fake cake emoji, was now at the center of a public conversation about workplace toxicity. I was invited to speak on panels, contribute articles to other publications, and even received inquiries about potential book deals. Opportunities arose that I never could have imagined just weeks earlier when I was lost in a fog of despair on my sofa. Financially, the blog didn't immediately replace my salary, but it opened doors to freelance writing and consulting gigs that were more aligned with my values and offered greater autonomy. More importantly, it provided a different kind of currency, validation, purpose, and a powerful sense of having reclaimed my narrative. The transformation I underwent during this period was profound. The woman who had walked out of that office building, clutching her box of belongings and feeling utterly broken, was not the same woman who now confidently spoke about her experiences on radio shows. The self-doubt that had plagued me for weeks began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from speaking my truth and seeing it resonate. I stopped seeing the termination as a reflection of my inadequacy and started seeing it as a reflection of the company's dysfunction. I had been trying to thrive in an environment that was fundamentally unhealthy, and my departure, though painful, was ultimately a liberation. The betrayal, the deep hurt I had felt, became the catalyst for finding my voice and my strength. I learned the immense cost of silence, the toll it takes on your spirit when you suppress your truth to fit in or please others. I had been so focused on being a good employee, a team player, that I had lost sight of being true to myself and valuing my own well-being. The toxic culture had fed on my desire for external validation and my people-pleasing tendencies, patterns that I now recognized needed to be addressed. Writing the blog was like therapy. It allowed me to process the anger, the hurt, the injustice. It forced me to articulate the subtle dynamics of the toxic workplace, to put names to the feelings I had suppressed for so long. And the public response validated my experiences, confirming that I wasn't just being sensitive or difficult, I was reacting to a real, pervasive problem. I also learned the power of boundaries. In my old job, I had none. I let work bleed into every hour of my day, allowed myself to be treated with less respect than I deserved, accepted less recognition than I had earned. The blog, and the subsequent public role it thrust me into, required me to set firm boundaries around my time, my energy, and my emotional space. I learned to say no, to prioritize my own well-being, and to protect my peace. Reclaiming my self-worth wasn't an overnight process, but it was intrinsically linked to finding my voice. By speaking out, I was telling myself, and the world, that my experiences mattered, that my feelings were valid, and that I deserved to be treated with respect. I wasn't just the creative lead anymore. I was Lena, a woman who had been knocked down but had found the strength to stand back up, not by conforming, but by speaking her truth. The blog continued to exist, a digital monument to resilience and the power of shared experience. I updated it periodically, sharing insights, reflections, and stories from others who reached out to me. It evolved from a place of airing grievances to a community for discussing workplace wellness, healthy boundaries, and finding fulfillment outside of toxic environments. My relationship with work changed completely. I became much more discerning about the projects I took on, the people I worked with, and the environments I was willing to put myself in. Financial stability was important, of course, but it was no longer the sole driver. My peace of mind, my sense of integrity, and my ability to work on projects I genuinely believed in became paramount. The memory of the cake emoji meeting still stings sometimes, a reminder of how quickly things can change and how vulnerable we are when our sense of self is tied to external validation or a corporate structure. But the sting is now accompanied by a sense of gratitude. That betrayal, as painful as it was, set me free. It forced me off a path that was ultimately unsustainable and led me to discover a strength and resilience I didn't know I possessed. I learned that true security doesn't come from a job title or a company's approval. It comes from within, from knowing your worth and having the courage to defend it. The toxic culture I escaped demanded my silence and compliance. By refusing to give it, by choosing instead to amplify my voice, I didn't just build a blog, I rebuilt myself. I look back at the person I was before that meeting. Anxious, people-pleasing, constantly seeking external validation, and I barely recognize her. The woman who emerged from the ruins of that betrayal is stronger, clearer, and unafraid to walk her own path, even if it means walking alone sometimes. The peace I feel now isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the quiet confidence of someone who has faced her fears, spoken her truth, and reclaimed her power. It's the profound satisfaction of knowing that even when life serves you a betrayal disguised as cake, you can find the strength to turn it into something real, something meaningful, something that helps not just you, but others too. The journey wasn't easy, filled with tears, doubt, and fear, but every step was necessary. The scar of the betrayal remains, a reminder of the cost of silence, but it is also a reminder of the incredible power that lies dormant within us, waiting to be awakened when we finally decide that our voice, our worth, and our peace are non-negotiable. I am no longer defined by how I was treated, but by how I chose to respond. And that, I've learned, makes all the difference. So, that's my story. The short version, anyway, of how a fake cake emoji and a termination letter completely upended my life, only to set me on a path I was meant to be on all along. I went from being the person quietly putting in the unseen labor, hoping someone would notice, to being the one who decided to shine a spotlight on the whole dysfunctional system. It was terrifying, absolutely, but staying silent, pretending everything was okay when it wasn't, that was far more damaging in the long run. Reclaiming my voice, especially through something as public as the blog, felt like coming home to myself. It was loud, it was messy, but it was authentically mine. It showed me that my value wasn't tied to a job title or a company's approval, but to my integrity, my creativity, and my willingness to be brave. If you're feeling stuck, undervalued, or silenced in any area of your life, whether it's work, family, or relationships, I want you to know that your experience is valid. Your voice matters. It might feel impossible to speak up, especially when the system you're in benefits from your silence, but finding even a small way to honor your truth can be the first step towards reclaiming your power. My journey started with a betrayal that felt like the end, but it turned out to be the catalyst for building a new beginning, one where I get to define my own worth. And you can too. If this story resonated with you, or if you have your own experience you'd like to share, please leave a comment below. I read every single one. Like this video if you found it helpful or empowering, and subscribe to join this community where we talk about finding our voices and building lives aligned with our true selves. Remember, you are not disposable, you are not invisible, your worth is inherent, not granted by someone else. Find your voice, tell your story, it's more powerful than you know.